I'm fundamentally proposing that the human race is no longer qualified to manage our affairs. I made an algorithm that takes better care of me than I can myself. We can engineer the source code for life. We have the computational tools that have exceeded our native intelligence and abilities. The game I'm trying to play in life is how to be respected by the 25th century.
Bryan, last time we spoke, it was 7 years ago. I look withered and old. You look like my 20-year-old self when we last spoke. So it's lovely to see you again.
It's wonderful to be here. Nice to see you.
Now, I would love to start. We were just saying beforehand, you've done many interviews. You've been asked many questions. My first one was, what are you not asked about that you would like to be asked about?
Probably how to process new ideas, new frames. There are new ways of thinking, and they challenge the status quo. And I make a rule for myself that whenever I encounter a new idea, I try to set up an alert in my brain that says, alert, new idea has landed. And when a new idea lands, the rule is I can't say anything or think anything to form conclusions for some duration of time. Because the challenge is when a new idea lands, your knee-jerk reaction fills the open space and it crams down your existing biases and beliefs and understanding, and it crushes the space for a new idea to breathe. And what I've noticed is it's a human tendency that we all have, and it takes a lot of work to develop this habit because the impulse to crush new ideas is so strong.
Can I just kind of dive in there? So you have a new idea alert. What does that post-alert look like? Do you then solicit feedback? Do you just ruminate on it? What does that kind of process look like post-alerting?
I try to watch what happens to my internal processes when the idea lands. So typically, we are threat response. And usually, new ideas are a threat to existing things. And so I watch my own self respond in all the ways where I feel threatened. Will this require change from me? Will this require that I do a new habit? Will it require that I have to overcome some existing belief system? What is it going to ask of me? And those things feel threatening. And in response to the threat, the body's like, we're going to shut this fucker down so we don't have to deal with the unpleasantness. Because that's just who we are and what we do. And so I just watch my internal processes, and it gives me clues which version of me is trying to shut this down and why. And so that to me is more interesting. So for me, what's interesting, the new idea itself is interesting. And then the second layer of interestingness is what's provoking inside of me that gives me clues on who's talking within me.
Are there commonalities in the who's talking within you in terms of the mindsets, the personas that you have, that it comes up?
I built this off of the idea of the evening Bryan concept, where he overate and he couldn't control himself, and that I separated myself into different versions of me. And I've really taken that to all areas of life, where if, let's say, a person is dedicated to a life of martyrdom, like they're going to sacrifice themselves. Let's just say they're a soldier in an army that's willing to give their life for country. And then a new idea comes up and says that this idea of nation states or countries may be lessening in its status in life. Like maybe it's not worth giving life for this thing because it's changing. That eliminates the entire game somebody is playing. So if you're already geared up and say, I find that I'm valuable in society because I'm doing this heroic act. If you remove the underlying layer, it's no longer heroic and valuable. And so it removes all of their identity. And so your knee-jerk response would be to fight back and to justify what you're trying to do. But those are the kinds of things that give whiplash to people, and in the most significant ways that are most important to.
When you think back to the alerting system, what was the most recent idea that caused an alert? And can you share it?
Yeah, I think the most significant one, when I was personally challenged with that the religion I was born into may not be the explanation of reality. And that was so uncomfortable because my entire existence I was born into a religion. That's all I understood reality to be. And then I started thinking maybe it wasn't true. Like maybe this wasn't the explainer of reality. And that is the most uncomfortable thing I had ever encountered in my life, because every single bit of my reality, my family and my children and my community and my identity and my ambitions, everything was built upon that thing. And to encounter that, you have to basically size up and say, I have to redo myself entirely. And that's so much work. You like almost want to just bury your head back in the thing and be like, I'm just going to avoid this because it's so uncomfortable to think about all this change. Like you have to get a divorce, become a divorced dad. You've got to be in different living conditions. You've got to it's so unpleasant to contemplate that change. It's just easier to duck your head back in. And that's what most of us do in life, is we encounter something that is so unpleasant, we'd rather not deal with it. We just go back into the habit.
Can I ask a weird one? Is it worth dealing with when you think about the divorce there, the being, a divorced father, for the awareness that actually it may not be the answers for the realities of life? Can you actually just get comfortable with that and recognize it, but not actually deal with the unpleasantness that comes with it?
I mean, change is hard. I mean, I think we all maybe try to do our best to make change fun and rewarding. I don't know. To me, it just feels like so much of life is inevitable pain and suffering. And it's not a negative. It's just a different experience. And I don't know if I would even try to minimize it. I'd probably just say it's just part of the journey.
What's been the most painful change to go through, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, it's leaving my religion.
Do you worry about being liked? Leaving religion, it's leaving social security as well. It's leaving friendship groups. It's leaving communities. Do you worry about being liked?
When I left the religion, I had to go through this process and rethink every aspect of my existence. And one of those things was the idea of being liked, because in the religious setting, you're constantly vying for the approval of those in the community. You want to be liked. You want to be respected. You want to obey the rules so that you have status. And with that status, you get certain privileges in the tribe. And so I wanted to confront the idea head on and say, what if I didn't desire to be liked? What would that do? Now, in some scenarios, being liked is a necessity of life. If you go into work each day and you're an awful human and no one likes you, that's not going to do you any favors. Like you need to have some kind of baseline likability to operate in society. But there's also a different place to play in, where if you play for likability in, for example, the new ideas space, that's a path for conformity. Because likability is conformity, and new ideas oftentimes disrupt that. And the liberation for me was basically flipping it and saying that I care about being liked by the 25th century, and specifically do not care about being liked by the people in this time and place. That to me was the most liberating thought experiment of my life, because then I could say, I'm no longer limited to the approval of my peers. I can explore the imagination space of what the 25th century might respect. And being able to do that, I mean, it feels good to be respected in time and place. It feels good to have status among peers. And I was willing to forego that because I want to play that game. To me, it was so much more exciting than pandering to whatever is the current zeitgeist of people's approval systems.
As a VC, I constantly pander to founders and to LPs, so this is a whole new concept for me, Bryan, but I'm learning. Can I go back to the idea process, though? Because you ruminate on it, you sit with it, and understand the different personas and how they interact with it. What then determines whether you act upon an idea and really pursue it versus disregard it and put it to one side?
So there's the idea as the information in itself. And then there's all the things around the idea that can't be seen. And so when I look at the idea, I don't try to identify what can be seen. I try to identify everything that can't be seen. And those are basically the unknown unknowns. Those are like the zeroth principle concepts. And so for me, new ideas are not something to accept or reject. New ideas are something to excavate. And you're trying to fill this thing out as broadly as possible. Because new idea may be just the tip of the spear. It may be something of the iceberg. It may be something much, much more expansive. And so to me, it's the possibility of finding new primitives to work with.
What's the most challenging part of that? Because the challenging part to me is the unknown unknowns are infinite. And so it could be this never-ending quest that actually leads to inactivity. Do you worry about that? And what's the most challenging part of that segment?
Yeah, I pressure test with a few questions. If a new idea lands, I can pose a question: what must be true for this to be true? What must remain true for this to be true? And then what would change, which would make this untrue? And so you're trying to move throughout time, and you're moving horizontally and vertically through time and space, pressure testing it. So you could say a given thing that may be true in this moment, but it may be entirely untrue in 3 years from now. And so, for example, I was talking to a friend last night, and I was explaining to him the concept of don't die. And he's a smart person, and he predictably said, well, I disagree with blank because I think superintelligence is blank and ML models are blank. And so he basically put forward the argument of the skepticism around whether or not we will achieve superintelligence. And so I wanted to reframe, because I understand his arguments. They're legitimate. They're well-reasoned. I understand them. Fine. I said, cool. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to reframe the problem and say, if you look at our moment from the 25th century, that's the framework which invites to how to think about what to do in this moment. Because if you can say, are we going to develop superintelligence? You're going to have thousands of different opinions about where algorithmic progress is, whether we have enough data, whether the algorithms can do this or that. It's just going to fracture into no one knows. If you look at it from the 25th century, assuming that we still exist around then, it's reasonable to assume that on some time scale, computational intelligence is going to improve substantially faster than we can imagine. Now, if you say that's okay, that's reasonable that you give that kind of time scale. So then you come back to the moment, you say, okay, given that we can make that general conclusion that it's going to improve at some rate and probably be unfathomable to us in many ways, what then do we do right now? And that framework opened him up to say, I understand why don't die might be relevant to this moment, because you're trying to basically nail the philosophical, economic, political, social underpinnings of reality on a multi-100-year timescale. But it takes that finesse to get the clarity of thought. Otherwise, you're buried in that moment. And so unless you ask those three questions of what must be true, what must remain true, and what would change, which would make that entirely untrue, you don't pressure test the ideas well enough, and you're stuck in this very narrow band of thought. And so to me, you have to go through those thought processes. Otherwise, you're rendered in the bubble of this moment, which just makes you up against a wall of fog.
How do you retain intellectual purity? And what I mean by that is what must be true, what must remain true. You can have biases towards what you want to really be true, but maybe not be true. It could be religion that it makes one bias in terms of their perspective. There are many different things that can bias how you feel about what those three answers are. How do you retain that purity to be objective?
It begins by being skeptical of all things. And I learned this when I left the religion. I had this authority structure saying, this is how reality is. And then I learned about behavioral psychology and about biases and 188 proven scientific biases of how my brain distorts reality to help me understand a complicated world. Now, it's doing me a favor because the world is extraordinarily complex and my biases help me understand the reality. At the same time, I'm hypocritical. I'm blinded to certain things. I'm a disaster of cognition. So when I found out that my own mind was just as deceptive and unreliable as other authorities in my life, and then I kind of walked through society, and every source of authority or truth I thought might be durable is not, including myself. And so I enter all things with this deep skepticism of anything trying to be ultimate truth. And so if you accept that as the opening bid, then you walk into the contemplation in a much more humble way to hold things very lightly. And so then you're trying to say, we can probably know immediate things with high certainty, and we can probably know long-term things with reasonable certainty. But in the middle, we just have fog, and everyone plays in the middle of fog. And so when you're trying to make these big decisions on the future of the species, you've got to figure out some way to navigate those thought processes to come up with some kind of clarity. And so if you say, what could we say about the 25th century that it may be different than what we do now? You could say general things like we'll have probably figured out how to be more energy efficient. We'll probably have figured out, computationally to be much more robust than we have now. You can make these general statements assuming some rule of progress and also excluding annihilation type scenarios. And if you just play those general rules, you can start walking back into, okay, then what might that mean for this moment? But it's really a game of trying to manufacture clarity of thought above all.
Do you accept anything today as an endurable truth, given the skepticism you bring naturally to everything to get that purity? Is anything an endurable truth? This
is why I arrive at don't die. It is the only thing in existence that I know. Is there an afterlife? I don't know. When death is inevitable, then you really can maintain any opinion you want because we're all going to die. So it's like, doesn't matter. But if death is not inevitable, then you have to reconsider all of your existential scaffolding. And that's why don't die. If you use a frame like live long, live great, be great, explore the stars, like whatever you want to say, people hear that and they're like, fuck yeah, I'm doing it. If you say don't die, the person has to reconcile with existence from zero. Because if you don't die, you're not going to die, or you're going to live in some unknown time horizon, every game you're playing in existence may be called into question. All of your beliefs, all of your assumptions, all of your endeavors, everything about you may be called into question.
Can I ask a weird one? But it's like, and this is as meta as I've ever bloody asked a question, Bryan. Life isn't about existence, is it? And what is the meaning of life to you? Is it about existence, or is it about fulfillment, or is it about love?
That question yields no truth. That question yields a mirror of time and place. So if we had a recording of people being asked that question for the past 500 years, every year that question is asked of 50 people in society, you would see it evolve over that time period into unrecognizable stories. None of it's truth. And this is the thing, we don't know what the meaning of life is. We just run our mouths, and we run our mouths to try to fill the space that the question creates. But we do so, and we aren't discerning, is this a question meant to create social cohesion, or is this a question to establish truth? It's not truth. It's to establish social cohesion, that people are trying to get along, trying to exchange views, they're trying to be human, understand reality. They're dealing with their own stuff internally. So it's how do you reduce the pain you're experiencing in this moment? The meaning of life to me is this, that when intelligence reaches a certain level of capability, which is right now, like after 4.5 billion years on this earth, in the past few years, we have reached a critical point after 4.5 billion years for the first time where intelligence can say the only thing intelligence cares about is continued existence. And not through the process of having babies, not through work, the immortality of work or contribution, but through actual existence. And this is why this moment is so critical. And so the meaning of life is, for me, continued existence, as it's the first moment that we've achieved that ability.
Given it being the first moment we've achieved that ability, as specific as possible, what is it that we've achieved as specifically as possible that has allowed human intelligence to be at this specific juncture?
Do we have the intelligence to keep, to contain disruption, to eliminate disruption of our existence? And then you say, okay, what would possibly be required to do that? Well, we are biological systems. We're each about 35 trillion cells. But, like we can swap in and swap out. Like you can print an organ or get an organ from, a pig and like put a new organ in your body. There's things you can do to replenish your system. But we can now reliably engineer atoms and molecules and organisms. We have the ability, we have the source code for life. We can engineer the source code for life. We have the computational tools that have exceeded our native intelligence and abilities. So we actually have every primary piece of technology required to continue existence. Now, do we know how to do it yet? We're making progress. The answer is no. But from a first principles perspective, we have everything necessary to figure it out.
How do you think about the core underlying threats to human existence? Climate change being worse than ever, bad global actors with nuclear weapons threatening in ways that we haven't seen in many years. Yeah. Are those not questioning our continued existence in a way that makes this challenging?
I'm fundamentally proposing that the human race is no longer qualified to manage our affairs. I started with myself. I said that I, Bryan Johnson, am not qualified to manage my own well-being. I do things that lessen my life. I overeat. I eat bad foods. I'll make bad decisions. Now, I do these things that threaten my existence. That is an inferior form of intelligence that would inflict upon itself harm. Now, our minds create these really pretty stories of like, live fast, die young. We're all going to die, so what does it matter? But that is a compensation for what is inherently an inferior form of intelligence doing something to itself that shortens its conscious existence, no matter how we want to say in the story. Now, as a species, we're doing that to planet Earth. We're doing that to each other. And we have these really pretty stories about we're competing for dominance, for ideology of nation state. We're doing this for capital improvements. We're doing it for progress for humanity. But we're a species that is self-destructive. And now that we're bringing online new tools of computational intelligence, it's this possibility to bridge ourselves to a new form of intelligence that is not self-destructive. And so don't die individually, don't kill each other, don't kill the earth. Align AI with don't die. And so if you stitch this together from the 25th century, what do they see? They say, God, those Homo sapiens were self-destructive. They were idiots. They did these things that shortened their conscious existence. And how insanely precious is conscious existence? And they told stories about why they're doing it to live their best life and have all the experiences. They're going to look at us like cavemen. It's going to be so ridiculous that we would do that we would take this precious consciousness we have and be so flippant with it.
So if we're no longer capable of managing our own affairs, and you said there you took yourself as the first test case, who do you hand your affairs over to? And I'm a big follower of David Goggins, who obviously talks about mental discipline a lot, the ability to do the uncomfortable even when your body screams another thing.
Yeah.
You are still human, Bryan. There are things that just require intense discipline. How do you think about who you hand over to and how to manage discipline in the hardest of times?
I made an algorithm that takes better care of me than I can myself. I measured every organ in my body, and I then referenced scientific literature, and we made an algorithm that determines what I eat, when I go to bed, and I can't deviate from that. And so I've agreed. Now, this is an analog version. This is not like I've got computational systems inside my body making the decisions for me. So I'm saying yes to this algorithm, but I'm explicitly saying no to myself.
How do you know the algorithm isn't based on imperfect data? Scientific literature changes over time too. If we look at it in the 25th century compared to the 18th century, it'll be vastly different. Smoking used to be good for you as soon as 100 years ago. How do you think about imperfectness of literature that guides your algorithm?
We reference truth based upon hundreds of biomarkers of using the best science that the human race has generated that contributes to health span and lifespan. And we use those data markers to say, is this protocol working or not? Could it be wrong? Yes. Is it wrong? Likely. Is it better than me and what I was doing before? Yes. Is the algorithm saying, you know what? You've had a tough week, curl up on the couch, get those 2 bags of potato chips and your favorite cookies and then some ice cream and watch your favorite show until 3 a.m. That's something the algorithm is not yet suggesting. Like maybe it will, it hasn't yet, but it's definitely steered me away from self-destructive behaviors and tuned my body where I've become the most measured person in history, and the data is pretty interesting.
I have so many questions to ask. My first is like, I get all of that, submit to the algorithm, but you are a cognitive functioning human, Bryan, and you still have feelings. And so when the feelings arise of, I am tired, I don't want to fucking do this, What do you say? Like, how do you overcome and computerize your mind?
Yeah, so that is an idea that is introduced to me of you are hungry and you should eat. And so the same with a new idea, I watch the idea land. I watch who responds, and I just witness and observe the whole thing.
I mean, I'm a disciplined guy, but fuck, I don't. What was the most surprising truth you revealed in this exploration of yourself as the first true algorithmic guinea pig, respectfully?
I individually and that we as a species are transitioning from being stewards of knowledge to not knowing anything, or rather not being moving into a frontier where we are no longer in that role, where AI is going to be a much better steward of knowledge. It's going to know all things that have been discovered. AI will know it. And AI is also going to do a new discovery. And it's going to do so at a speed that will be, we will be unable to keep up. In that scenario, AI is knowledge of record. So it's no longer that a person maintains the superior knowledge. And so that calls into question everything you understand about being human, is you're going from knowing to not knowing.
How do you think about the core element of permission? You know, you willingly gave yourself over to this algorithm, believing that it manages yourself better than you do and humanity does. Is there a point where humans don't have the permission to do so? And if not, how do you think about tipping points of human acceptance of algorithms as the primary?
We already do this. So these ideas, a lot of people listening to this, their knee-jerk reactions are going to be something like, this guy's nuts, this is dystopic. Like the majority of people listening will have those thoughts, because even though we've talked about the process of new ideas landing and trying to be open-minded and not doing, even though that's the entry point for our conversation, people are going to want to hate on these ideas so fast because they threaten everything about our existence. So with that, now having said that, the opportunity is to see those response, breathe into it, and then explore it.
Bryan, what scares you today when you look at everything that we have in front of us, when you look at the data that you have on your own body, and you lie in bed at night? I'm sure you go to sleep pretty quickly because I don't imagine your scores to go down at all. But what does scare you?
I really don't want to die. And I'm here on this planet with a bunch of people who do.
Does that stop you doing everything? I was thinking about this, before this. I was like, Bryan, I have so much respect for you. But like, dude, a car could come. You can't get on a plane. Like, the house could set on fire. The negative externalities are infinite.
This is what I'm talking about. When you look at this from both ends of the time frame. So let's just say, what do we know immediately? We can make the observation that life is fragile and it may be taken from us at any moment. And then people will say that and say, well, if your life can be taken at any moment for any random reason, it doesn't make sense to do anything other than to live life to its fullest, live fast, die young. And so you're in that, right? That's the immediate observation of like, that's concrete. We know that, and it leads to a very rapid conclusion. If you go out to the far end of the spectrum of the 25th century, you get clarity again, where it's not that we Homo sapiens don't have the risk of death. It's getting the gist right in the larger context. Okay, after 4.5 billion years of Earth's existence, we're baby steps away from superintelligence. The only thing that matters in this moment is our continued existence into this future. Nothing else matters. But do you see how, like, even your question comes at this thing, rejecting the idea of don't die, filling it with the moment of, well, if life is so precarious, can be taken at any moment, we might as well. And so then you eliminate all the open space for the new idea. And this is primarily what's been happening to me over the past few years is people dunk on me so hard, but they're actually not able to reach outside of this very narrow moment of time and to understand this larger context in which we exist. Now, to give you a framework that will make this much more tangible, travel back in time, we're hanging out with Homo erectus, has an axe in their hand, and we say, where's food, where's shelter, where's danger? We listen. If we say, Homo erectus, tell us the future of the species, we laugh. So we, in this moment, are Homo erectus. We know where there's danger, we know where there's food, and we know where there's shelter. We know nothing about the future of our existence. We don't know what we're going to care about. We don't know what life is going to be like. We don't know what our values are going to be. We're just as blind, if not more so, than Homo erectus. And this is the humility that we're invited to have in this moment. And this is why it's so challenging for all of us, because we fill the air with our opinions before we have any time to breathe in the new idea. We shut them down so fast.
Can I ask you, how does the willingness to submit in this way impact your parenting? And you obviously have a son. How does that change in this enlightened Bryan?
I think my children and my friends and family would say, this is the best version of me I've ever achieved. I'm more sober-minded. I have better clarity of thought. My emotions are much more stable. I've never been a better human than I am right now in every characteristic. And so I think that they appreciate that I work very hard on myself to try to be the best form of a human I can.
Do you impose it on them?
No.
Why?
I've been very clear with them that I will teach through example. I'll offer my perspective, but it is their choice on what they do, on a moment-to-moment basis.
Does it hurt when you believe in the right path and you see them choose a different path, which is natural, especially as you grow up and you learn yourself? Does that hurt you as a father?
I'm happy that they get a go at this specialness of conscious existence. And the way I frame this with them is I say, I'm going to act in the role of your future self. So for my son Talmadge, I'll say, if you ever want to talk to your future self, if you want to talk to your 46-year-old self or 42-year-old, I'll fill in for that role and we'll do role play. And we'll talk about, what do you value for decisions made in college? And how would you think about, the following things? And it's a way for him to have this dialogue, because if you think about right now, one of the most sacred beliefs we have about existence is that you or I, in this moment, get to decide what we do, how we do it, and why we do it at any moment. So if you set your alarm for 6 a.m. at 10 at night and you wake up at 6 a.m, you want to snooze, 6 a.m. you gets exactly what they want. They get to hit the snooze button. So present you always has the authority to do whatever it wants, no matter what it's said in the past. And no matter what future you would say, present you dominates. So imagine a future where you are basically your present you is one vote among thousands of future yous. You're like a democracy of sort for yourself. Now that, of course, challenges some of the things we consider most sacred about our existence, but why is that idea not feasible or even a good idea? I certainly have a relationship with my 20-year-old self and the decisions that he made in that time and place, and I would definitely change many things about my former self that I'm now dealing with the consequences of that.
Sorry to be personal, and do say if it's too personal. Do you have a partner now?
I don't.
Do you get lonely in this existence? Because it is, you mentioned the pushback that you get online. I see it and I'm like, I always think it's a reflection of other people. You just make them feel shit because you do things that they probably wouldn't be willing to do. It's why people hate on people when they post about like running marathons. It's like, dude, just because you didn't do it. So like, fine. But like, do you get lonely in this existence?
No, I don't. I've recreated my social life, my community. It was growing up in a religion, community is solved for you. Yeah. Everyone is there for you. They're all similar. You all have the same beliefs. It's easy to have friends. It's easy to get along. So it's just solved for you. And then if you leave that community, you have to basically create community of your own. And so I've gotten really good at that over the past few years, and I feel satiated.
Do you not think in many ways humanity needs religion to form social cohesion, to form bond, to form companionship in a way that really may be artificial, agreed, but it's needed to form those social bonds?
If you look at the data, I think it might be fair to observe that religion has been the most powerful and effective and durable technology in all of history. It has outlasted nation states. It's outlasted technological trends. It's outlasted every other form of human organization. It's the most durable technology in the species.
Does religion outlast AI?
It's so hard to tell. At this point where we're up against a wall of not knowing, I don't know.
How do you think about the statement that's often said, we will always overestimate usage or adoption in the short term and underestimate it in the long term? When you think about implementation, progression, adoption of AI, how do you think about timescales associated? It's a shit question, so forgive me for it. But the timescales associated and whether we are overestimating or underestimating it in one or the other.
Yeah, this is a question that, again, triggers thoughts of the moment. And to me, it just creates a fog for everybody. Because then if you're a genuinely interested person about this question, you hear dozens of the top experts in the world all express different opinions, and for good reasons. Like, they all have well-reasoned arguments. And so then you say, how do I discern who's correct and who's incorrect and in what ways? It's impossible. And that's when I say, okay, if I can't discern truth in this moment, I have to fast forward a few hundred years, because otherwise I can't deduce truth in any way. And so how do you come up with code? So if you try to basically generate coherence of thought, because the question is basically inviting an answer of what do we do now? Because presumably knowing whether we're 1 year away from superintelligence or 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 or never, it informs something about reality. Like somehow it informs the next step we have in this present moment. So by playing on these timescales, you can work with yourself to create coherence of thought. And that's ultimately the best tool we have as a species, as an individual, is overcoming the noise of the moment and finding signal.
What's the biggest enemy to the coherence of your thought still today?
Whether or not I slept well last night.
Do you ever sleep badly? Because I saw tweets of yours a while ago, and yours were like 4 months of perfect scores, and I was like, God, does this guy never have a siren that goes off or a plane that goes overhead? Like, talk to me about that.
Yeah, 2 nights ago, I had a terrible night's sleep. I just started a peptide and I took it before bed. I did an injection and it wrecked my sleep. And I woke up the next morning feeling absolutely awful. And the entire day I was ornery and foggy, and I was more emotional, and it was just like the worst day. And last night I had a spectacular night of sleep, and now I feel like I can do anything. After doing this for years, when you sleep poorly, you do normalize to it, but you normalize to a blurred state of reality. You don't remember what the clarity of good sleep feels like. And so what's my biggest enemy? Poor sleep and a bad diet and no exercise. That creates cloudiness that remains invisible because you can no longer see it. It's lethal.
Sleep condition wise, what is that for you in terms of hot room, cold room, light, dark, pillows, duvets, travel, you name it?
Yeah, my life is engineered around sleep because I'm trying to basically the game I'm trying to play in life is how to be respected by the 25th century. And that game to me means clarity of thought. Because when I go through history and I read biographies, it was those who had clarity of thought, who could see the inevitable things and then did those things, which I admire. And to do that, you've got to play game. You've got to be your best self. You can't be getting 4 hours of sleep a night and having a poor diet and exercise. You're going to render yourself. You can't overcome that level of intoxication. You're legitimately intoxicated by mind and you're just impaired.
What do you say to people who say, it's too late for me? It's too late for me to submit myself to this. I've already done the damage of drinking, of smoking, of being overweight. Is there ever too late? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I just say give up. No.
Incredibly supportive. You should be a therapist, Bryan. That's wonderful.
my dad is 71. His life expectancy based upon how he's lived his life is 68. He's been obese and he's done hard drugs. And so I've been working with him on Project Keep Dad Alive. And he's been doing all the advanced therapies I have. He's on Blueprint. We talk, I work with him very closely. We're trying to keep him alive until the next thing comes along. But his ferociousness of wanting life is so inspiring to me. He wakes up every day and he appreciates his consciousness with a fire that I find infectious. And, you take somebody who's like 20, 30s and they're healthy and they're just like, yeah, we're all going to die. But you say that when your body feels nothing of the ravages of aging. You start losing function. Aging's awful. And you get there, no one's running the same lines there.
I was struggling the other day with something, and my friend said, you know what? A healthy man has 100 wishes, but a sick man has only one. And
exactly.
That struck me. Final thing before we do a quick fire. How do you just think about the societal breakages that happen with Do Not Die? Don't laugh, but pensions are relatively upholding of large nations. Suddenly you have overpopulation, you have pensions breaking, you have an inequality of age distribution. Does society not need to fundamentally reshape to structure to do not die as an existence?
It does. Yeah. Once you get, Don't Die is the most played game in existence. No, there's no game on planet Earth that all intelligence plays more than Don't Die. Every second of every day, all of us are playing Don't Die. And it's played even more than capitalism. Played more than any religion. Don't Die is the number one most played game. And so in that context, once you say don't die and you step one layer above it, then we fracture into a billion different games. Some of us try to make money. Some pursue religion. Some pursue, a monk life. Like people go down a different path, but they're all based upon a don't die disposition towards reality. And so just like democracy, when democracy was a new form of governance, it was this basic idea that you have these new representation structures that replace a monarch, and you have these new processes on deciding what to do. And once you establish that basic idea, like, hey, this is a better thing than a monarch, you've got thousands of questions. So we're now 200 years into the process of figuring out how to do democracy. The same is true with Don't Die. If you just get that basic concept right, you've got an infinite number of follow-on questions of what about. And so this is not the case of this is meant to solve everything. It's meant to say, if we solve for the primary operating system of existence, then we can get at the game of solving the thousands of questions that then follow after. But right now, we're bringing super intelligence into the world, and we're doing it in the games we play now, which is go to war, become more effective at killing people, acquire more wealth. Like, we're playing games of violence and death. And if we do that, we're probably increasing the odds that we annihilate ourselves.
Does the only way to succeed, though, not mean everyone agrees? Because you can have one nation that doesn't agree to this and goes, fuck you, and presses a button. Like, is it not a world of entire conformity, or none of it works?
I think to try to generate clarity of thought, I see the future as a computational mesh of goal alignment. And so, for example, if you, like, previously the analog version of Bryan would look at a menu, order something, and eat it. Now this algorithm runs me, where it's measuring me, looking at the evidence, and then the protocol is in place. I can imagine that systems are inside my body and outside my body, and they run like the stock market. You're looking at transactions with my DNA and my proteins in a millisecond, in the second time frame. It's just running without my awareness. And so I'm an autonomous human, and everything's just running. Now, that autonomous reconciliation of how to keep Bryan to not die is running in you as well, and everyone else, and then also with the planet, and also with AI, that these systems are going to run faster than our minds, the more efficient than our minds. They'll have more data than our minds. So the future is us in this autonomous network of computational goal alignment among all intelligence. Now, that sounds unfathomable to us. It's also inevitable. Give me an argument, like, tell me where we won't inevitably do this. Now, an example is Ozempic is an algorithm. If people are overweight and they're having problems with overeating, you take a pill and it turns off hunger. Let's put side effects aside for a moment. It is an algorithm that changes your hunger profile, and it gets you this desired outcome of having less weight on your body.
Do you like Ozempic? Because you've shown ultimate discipline. The ability to just eat less is discipline.
I wouldn't do Ozempic myself. I'm also not 350 pounds, and I know what it feels like to be overweight. So I'm pretty soft on this. Like, there are some serious side effects, but man, like, being overweight and overeating is a miserable existence. So I'm very soft. Like, I understand why somebody would want to take Ozempic. I understand that they just can't stop themselves, but it's an algorithm. And so, like, this future is inevitable, and the faster we can reconcile with it and overcome ourselves. But this is why these ideas are provocative. That they invite you to understand, to reassess everything about your own existence.
I could talk to you all day, but I'm aware that you probably have windows that you need to observe. So I want to do a couple of quick fire questions. Is that okay?
Sure.
What's been the most expensive test that you've run on your body? And how much was it?
Probably MRI. I get a lot of MRIs. Each one is like $1,000 or $2,000, somewhere in that range. It's not like one test is like $100,000. I do hundreds of tests, and they're all some amount, which stacks up.
Sorry to ask. Is sex better?
Yes.
How so?
My team and I, so one day we were talking, and we'd quantify my organs. Like, we will look at my heart and say, how do you quantify the function and anatomy of the heart to bioage it? And one day I asked my team, I said, what would it take for me to have the most quantified penis in the world? And then after we quantify my penis and my sexual function, how do you rejuvenate the penis? And so one marker we looked at was nighttime erections. It's a significant indicator of physiological, cardiovascular, and sexual health. And my baseline measurement was 2 hours and 12 minutes. I did all the baseline measurements. I did some therapies, and then I achieved just under 3 hours, which is better than the average 18-year-old. So in that regard, I've quantitatively improved my sexual function.
Wow. Good for you, Bryan. Jesus Christ. You make 3 hours, dude. You could watch Titanic in that time. Is there anything that you would not be willing to do if the algorithm said it?
It's a new idea. I'm open.
Do you get hurt by the critique that you see online?
No. It makes me endlessly happy.
Do you ever do holidays?
I do. Yeah. My son and I went to Singapore over the break. We went to New Zealand last year. So we went to Utah and rode bikes around the desert for a week. So yeah, we do a lot of outdoor adventure.
For someone listening today that wants to improve their sleep, what one piece of advice would you give them?
Reframe your identity that you are a professional sleeper. So in the same way that each one of us every day shows up to our meetings on time, if we're 2 minutes late, we apologize. So set your bedtime and show up on time. And if you're 2 minutes late, apologize, but respect yourself as much as you respect others for being on time.
What seemingly healthy thing is actually bullshit?
Debauchery. The stories that people tell of their favorite vice, it's like the glass of wine and the bowl of pasta with friends late at night talking about blankety blank as their most special moments. They treat it as though that's the only way that state can be achieved. It's the only way it can be configured. And they just justify the debauchery as healthy. They're masquerading that as healthy.
Penultimate one for you. Who do you most look up to and respect?
People in the past. I'm so fluent in biographies. I can, at will, have a dialogue with them in my mind.
Which is the best biography or the most revisited in your mind?
They're all unique. Political figures, scientific inventors, philosophical, religious. They're such a variety. I enjoy all of them. And there's no one that was dominant in my mind. It's just this fluid conversation.
The final one, Blueprints in 10 years. Where do you want it to be then? When we revisit this in 10 years, where is Blueprints?
Just did a photo shoot where I posed as the Vitruvian Man, Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, arms out. And I'm going to share that on social media. I'm going to call it the Autonomous Man. So in that moment, Da Vinci was charting new territory with dimensions and the dimensions and sketch of the human body. And he did it with this level of perfection that nobody had done it before. And if you take that and you say, if you were to redo that now, what would be the modern interpretation? And I'm suggesting that is the autonomous man, which is we're walking towards this future where what we do primarily as humans today will be automated by our algorithms. And we are going to love it. And we're going to comment that we can't believe that we humans ever existed in the current state we're in.
Bryan, I've done 2,700 interviews. I mean, this has been 10 years. I've never done an interview quite like this. I mean, I had a schedule and then I just asked the first question and that was the only question that we really got to, which is fantastic, by the way. But thank you so much for joining me. I so appreciate this. And I want to say I have so much respect for you. I think it's incredible and the discipline is immense and inspiring.
I appreciate you walking with me. It's, as an interviewer, I know it's hard because you have preconceived ideas about what you want to talk about, and to go in flow is challenging, and you did it. So thank you for the fun dialogue.